It's often said that the truth is stranger than fiction. That may be why filmmakers often turn to true mysteries for inspiration, sometimes bringing the entire true story to the screen. Number 10. The Vast of Night is a 2019 film about a mysterious event in the fictional New Mexico town of Cayuga. Those familiar with UFO lore will recognize some of the unsolved mysteries that the movie took inspiration from. The movie focuses on an investigation by radio DJ Everett and switchboard operator Faye. It's the night of a major basketball game that has the attention of the whole town. But as the town prepares for the game, Everett receives multiple reports of a mysterious object in the sky. His show only attracts more attention when Faye picks up a strange radio signal she can't explain. Everett plays the signal on his show and gets a call from a man with an unusual story about the signal. He claims to have once worked for the military on a top-secret project. He and other workers dug a large hole out in the desert, and something was lowered into it and covered up. As they drove away from the location, the men heard the mysterious signal over the car radio. The caller claims that he and the other workers fell sick after the incident and never learned just what was buried in the desert. Everett and Faye continue their investigation into the mysterious events. The chances of this being extraterrestrial seem to increase with every piece of evidence, until eventually the pair make their way into the woods where something unknown overtakes them. As far as the story goes, even the filmmaker admitted that it's nothing groundbreaking. In fact, it's a story that many people might be familiar with. In 1965, people across 6 U.S. states reported something strange flying through the night sky. It resembled a fireball, but didn't act in the way of a typical meteor. John Murphy was a radio DJ at a Pennsylvania station, located near where the object supposedly crashed. He received many calls about the mysterious object and decided to investigate himself. The mysterious object became known as the Kecksburg UFO, and just what was seen in the night sky that December has never been confirmed. It may have been something natural, a satellite from the Cold War, or something more extraterrestrial. Number 9. Call Northside 777 is a 1948 movie that tells the story of a newspaper journalist trying to prove a convicted man is innocent of the crime that's put him behind bars. Names are changed, but the movie is largely the retelling of a harrowing ordeal and a crime that remains unsolved to this day. The mystery began on December 9, 1932 in Chicago. Police officer William Lundy visited a deli owned by Vera Wallish. Officially, Wallish sold meats and groceries, but it was well known that she ran a speakeasy. Wallish's illegal activity didn't bother Lundy. He came into the kitchen at the back of the store and began chatting with Wallish's young daughter. Also in the kitchen was a man named John Zagata. As they sat around the fire, 2 large figures came into the store, brandishing weapons. Lundy had his back to the door and didn't realize that anything was wrong until Wallish was rushing to hide in a closet. Lundy then reached for his weapon, but before he could defend himself, the 2 newcomers opened fire. The criminals left without making any money. Lundy passed away before reaching the hospital. Violent crime was a serious problem in Chicago, and Lundy's case became a breaking point. There was immense pressure on government officials and the police to solve the case. Many young men were interviewed, but there was no evidence any of them had any connections to the crime. One of the people the police wanted to interview was Ted Marcinkiewicz. A friend of Wallish had suggested he might have something to do with the robbery gone wrong. Ted decided to hide in the home of his friend, Joe Mychek. After several days, the police were led to Joe's home while Ted wasn't present. The police brought Joe in for questioning. They had no evidence against him, and he actually had an alibi at the time of the crime, but that didn't help him. Wallish selected him out of a police lineup, and Joe was charged with the crime. Ted was later caught and also charged. Wallish was the key witness when the case went to trial. There was no other evidence, but her testimony was enough to convince the jury, and both men were found guilty. Neither Joe's wife nor his mother ever stopped believing he was innocent. His mother took a job cleaning buildings to raise money for a reward for information that could prove her right. She advertised in a local paper, $5,000 reward for the killers of Officer Lundy on December 9, 1932. 2 journalists, John McFall and James McGuire, noticed the advertisement. They figured that there might be a human interest story behind it and interviewed Joe's mother. They then began investigating the case more deeply. It turned out that Walsh had initially told the police she was unable to identify the criminals. Zagata also said he hadn't gotten a good look at them, but he believed he would have seen more than Walsh, as she'd hidden herself in a closet. Zagata didn't believe Joe and Ted were the criminals responsible, and neither did the judge who presided over the case. The police had threatened to arrest Walsh for bootlegging if she didn't help them close the case, and she eventually identified the men they pointed out to her. It took over 11 years after the initial conviction, but the work of the journalist brought enough attention to the case for Joe to be pardoned. Ted remained behind bars until 1950, when he was legally exonerated. Number 8. The disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa is one of the most infamous unsolved mysteries in FBI and organized crime history. Most agree that the union boss is no longer alive, but who was responsible for taking his life has never been determined. The Martin Scorsese film, The Irishman, provides one answer to that mystery. The 2019 movie was based on the book I Hear You Paint Houses, which was written by the lawyer of Frank Sheeran and based on lengthy interviews with the mobster. Sheeran became involved in organized crime after serving in World War II. According to the biography, he worked as an enforcer and a hitman for a crime family in Philadelphia, which eventually put him in contact with Hoffa. Hoffa was best known as the leader of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. The organization was the most powerful union in the United States and had ties with both powerful political figures and mafia activity. The union's pension was invested to help fund various mob-run businesses, including casinos in Las Vegas. As portrayed in the film, Hoffa came to Sheeran when he needed rivals removed. Sheeran claimed to have committed multiple hits for the union boss. The two had a friendship, and Hoffa was even close to Sheeran's family. In return for his help, Hoffa helped Sheeran get a position in the union organization. But some of Hoffa's enemies couldn't simply be removed. In the early 1960s, Attorney General Robert Kennedy set up a Get Hoffa squad, which eventually led to him being convicted of attempted bribery and fraud. While he was in prison, executive assistant Frank Fitzsimmons became acting president. He was just as connected to the crime families as Hoffa had been. In fact, his presidency was even more beneficial to the criminals. That meant that when Hoffa was released early by the Nixon administration, it was in their best interest to keep him out of union politics. Part of Hoffa's parole terms was that he wouldn't get involved with the union, but that didn't stop him from trying to wrestle control back from Fitzsimmons. According to Sheeran, this upset the various criminals who'd gained under the new president. So in 1975, he was ordered to take Hoffa out. Hoffa was last seen on July 30th, 1975. He'd gone to meet Anthony Provenzo and Anthony Giacolone, important figures of two different crime families. It was supposed to be some kind of peace meeting, but when Hoffa arrived at the restaurant, neither was anywhere to be found. He called home to complain about being stood up and was never heard from again. The Irishman answers what happened next. According to Sheeran, he arrived to tell Hoffa the meeting was taking place in another location. Sheeran drove him there in a car with a few other associates, including Hoffa's adopted son. But there was nobody at the house when they arrived. Instead, Sheeran took his friend's life and left him there for others to clean up. Sheeran isn't the only person to have confessed to taking Hoffa's life, and many experts in the case have cast doubt on his story. While most of the people involved in the affair are no longer alive, it's likely the mystery will never be solved. Number 7. The state of West Virginia has more than its fair share of local cryptid legends, but few are more famous or infamous than the so-called Moth Man. A large part of that fame comes from the books and films about the legendary creature, including the 2002 movie, The Moth Man Prophecies. The Moth Man Prophecies is based on a book of the same name, written by journalist John Keel. Like a lot of movies that claim to be based on or inspired by true events, The Moth Man Prophecies takes a lot of artistic license, but it did the job of introducing many to the true events of 1967 and 66 in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. The film follows fictional Washington Post journalist John Klein, who takes the role of John Keel in the movie. While traveling from Washington to Richmond, Virginia, John somehow gets lost and winds up in Point Pleasant. There, he discovers that the locals have been haunted by a giant winged creature with red eyes. One of these witnesses is a man who's been plagued by voices in his head. These are revealed to be from a man named Ingrid Cold. Cold later interacts with John directly, giving him information only something supernatural could know. These include prophecies of disaster, which one by one come true. The last of these prophecies is a disaster on the Ohio River. This is the Silver Bridge collapse, a horrifying disaster that in the movie claims the lives of 36 people. Neither John nor any of the other characters get any closure on who or what the Mothman is. According to text that appears before the credits, the cause of the Silver Bridge collapse was never determined, and the Mothman has never been seen in Point Pleasant again. Neither of these statements is true. The true story of the Mothman dates back to November 1966. A group of grave diggers in nearby Clendenin reported seeing a creature darting from tree to tree overhead. They later described it as a winged humanoid. The more famous sighting came a few days later when a group of people in a car claimed to see the creature standing in front of them. It avoided the headlights, but they could make out a creature with a 10-foot wingspan and terrifying red eyes. It couldn't walk well, but when it was in flight, it was able to keep up with the car. The sightings received media attention, and over the next 13 months, there were many more sightings which added to the legend. These mostly came to a halt in December of 1967, when the Silver Bridge over the Ohio River collapsed. 46 people, rather than the 36 stated in the movie, lost their lives. Many claimed to have seen the Mothman on the bridge and believed the creature was a harbinger of doom. Analysis of the disaster revealed an eye-bar failure was to blame for the disaster. The bridge was made in 1928 and was designed for fewer and lighter cars. The story of the Mothman has never been fully explained. Number 6. It can sometimes be difficult to determine what true stories have been woven into pieces of fiction, especially when the fiction is only inspired by the true story, rather than being based upon the historical event. In many ways, it's simply up to the audience to determine what comes from real life and what's simply a coincidence. This particular story involves a respected doctor who discovers his wife has had her life brutally taken from her. The person responsible is a figure with an unusual physical description, but it's the doctor who's put on trial on the case. Despite insisting that he's innocent, the man is found guilty. Today's audiences might recognize the story as the inciting event in the 1993 movie, The Fugitive. But people watching the TV series the movie was based on in the 1960s would recognize it as the horrifying events of the Shepard case. In 1954, Sam Shepard was a respected neurosurgeon living in Bay Village, Ohio, with his wife, Marilyn, and their young son. Sam spent July 3rd at work at Bayview Hospital, but joined his wife in entertaining friends at their home in the evening. He was worn out from work and fell asleep on a daybed. The couple's guests left just after midnight while Sam was still asleep. The next time anybody heard from the couple was at 5:40 a.m. the following morning. Sam called a friend, the mayor of Bay Village, and explained that his wife had been attacked and was no longer alive. First, the mayor and later investigators would come to discover a horrifying scene. Marilyn had been attacked in her bedroom and left in a truly disturbing state. There was no sign of any forced entry, and it didn't appear as if there'd been any fight, but Shepard told a strange story. He claimed to have been awoken by Marilyn's shouts. He found what he described as a strange white form in the bedroom and tried to fight it. Sam was briefly knocked out, but he came to and attacked the figure again, chasing it onto the beach, where he then lost consciousness. When he came to, he was missing his shirt and watch. At the house, he discovered his son was still fast asleep, but Marilyn was no longer alive. The story was extremely strange, and Sam's description of the figure was even more perplexing. He didn't call it a man or even a person, describing it as a bushy-haired form and biped. The doctor soon came under suspicion, and there was a lot of pressure from the local media for the police to put him behind bars. That pressure meant that when the case eventually went to trial, all the jurors knew of the case. There was no way he could get a fair trial. Jurors had already heard details and rumors, including evidence that wasn't presented in the trial. Even the judge had already made up his mind on Sam's guilt before the trial ever began. He was found guilty and sentenced to prison. Shepard continued to insist that he was innocent, and the case was appealed by attorney F. Lee Bailey. After a complex series of appeals, Shepard won the case and was released. While he was in prison, the original TV series The Fugitive was running. The series creator later insisted that he hadn't taken inspiration from the Shepard case. The fictional doctor, Richard Kimball, escapes prison and tries to solve his own wife's case, something that never happened to Shepard. In fact, Marilyn's attacker has never been identified, and the case remains a mystery. Number 5. The 2014 film Deliver Us from Evil claims to have been inspired by the real-life stories of New York police officer Ralph Sarchie. The disturbing events of the movie are nothing more than a work of fiction, but Sarchie's life is full of strange paranormal encounters that wouldn't have been out of place in the horror film. Sarchie was a New York police officer who was drawn into investigating paranormal activity and unexplained events that couldn't be solved traditionally. After 2 decades with the NYPD, he gave up a successful career to commit himself full-time to investigating these mysterious cases and removing demonic figures from people's lives. During his career as a demonologist, Sarchie claimed to have participated in over 20 exorcisms and many more house exorcisms, removing evil spirits and demons from the homes of victims in New York and further afield. One of these exorcisms featured in a documentary about his life, and actors watched a horrifying clip to help them understand the roles they were taking in Deliver Us from Evil. During his career, he worked with many other demonologists and those involved with the supernatural. The character of Father Mendoza in the movie wasn't based on a real person in the same way that Archie is portrayed, but he was inspired by 2 real-life individuals who Sarchie worked with, Bishop Robert McKenna and Father Malachi Martin. Both had long careers investigating and trying to stop paranormal activity, and both had books and films made about their own stories. But Sarchie's closest colleague was a man named Joe Forrester. The two met through a mutual contact, the famous Lorraine Warren. Sarchie had written to her to express admiration for her work, and she told him about one of her colleagues who lived just 2 blocks from Sarchie in New York. Sarchie and Forrester worked together on many cases, attempting to solve mysteries that couldn't be understood through natural means. Some of these cases were retold in Sarchie's book, Beware the Night. One story concerns a young family that's being terrorized by a demonic entity. The entity first appears to the mother, Gabby, who sees it like a woman standing on a cloud of smoke. She later saw the ghost of her own father, but the haunting takes a dark turn, with strange noises coming from the home's basement. The word help written on the bathroom mirror, and a small furry creature that Sarchie believes wants to attack the couple's daughter. A story that doesn't feature is the plot of Deliver Us from Evil. The story of an Iraq war veteran being possessed by a creature he encountered in the Middle East was entirely the work of the filmmakers, but they claim that Sarchie's character was based entirely on the man himself. Number 4. Sir Harry Oakes met a disturbing end in his home in the Bahamas in 1943. His case became one of the most famous unsolved mysteries of the period and inspired books and movies, including the 1983 movie Eureka. When it was released, Eureka was met with mixed reviews. The movie added in some strange voodoo elements that were never part of the real story, and provided an answer to the mystery that was never found in real life. But the true events of the Harry Oakes case alone make for a gripping story. Oakes was a self-made millionaire. He made his fortune in the mining business, having abandoned early studies to become a doctor. His early life took him around the world, setting up or purchasing mining operations in multiple different countries. He owned one of the most productive mines in the Western Hemisphere, making himself and his family very wealthy. He eventually settled down in Nassau in the Bahamas, where he became an important investor and developer. Oakes befriended powerful people, including the Duke of Windsor, the former king of the United Kingdom. His daughter Nancy was also in contact with rich and powerful people. While studying in New York, she married Count Alfred de Marigny, a rich Frenchman. The marriage happened shortly after Nancy's 18th birthday, and without her parents' knowledge. Oakes and de Marigny never got along, and they weren't on speaking terms when Oakes met his end in 1943. The night of July 3rd, 1943 was stormy. Oakes was entertaining guests at his home. It was a small gathering, and most left at the end of the night. A close friend, Harold Christie, stayed behind as he didn't want to drive in the bad weather. Oakes' wife wasn't home that night, so it was only the two men in the house. At 7 a.m. the following morning, Christie went to wake his friend. He discovered a horrifying scene in Oakes' bedroom. Oakes had been attacked with some kind of weapon which left a puncture wound. He was then set alight. Parts of the bedroom had been burned, and the mattress was badly damaged. An investigation started immediately. The Duke of Windsor brought American investors to the Bahamas to try to crack the case, but significant errors were made. The faulty investigation meant justice would never be found. Suspicion immediately fell on de Marigny. He'd been having a gathering of his own on the night of the attack and was driving people home when the crime was believed to have occurred. He confessed to being near Oakes' home at the time, but claimed he hadn't been inside for years. During the investigation, the police claimed that fingerprint evidence was found at the crime scene, which linked de Marigny to the crime. It was later determined the evidence was faulty. The case made it to trial, but de Marigny was found not guilty. A motive was never really established, other than the personal problems between the two men, and there is no real evidence de Marigny was behind the crime. Nobody else was ever arrested in the case, but over the years other theories have been put forward. Some have suggested it may have been the work of members of a criminal organization. This was the theory that Eureka promoted. Oakes owned a lot of land, but Nassau was a rapidly growing city, and it was possible that someone wanted that land. More than 80 years have passed since the crime, with no new answers emerging in that time, and it's unlikely this case will ever be solved. Number 3. The 1985 film Mesmerized tells a strange story of a woman trapped in a loveless marriage who uses hypnotism and chloroform to take her husband's life and escape with her brother-in-law. The movie claims to have been inspired by a real person, crime, and trial. The true mystery behind the movie is even stranger than fiction and will likely never be solved. The fictional version of events takes place in New Zealand in the 1880s. Oliver Thompson is a wealthy store owner who decides to marry a young woman named Victoria. The marriage is an unhappy one from the beginning, and Victoria plans to run away with her brother-in-law, George. To escape her husband, Victoria hypnotizes him using nose clippers and passages from a book given to her by the preacher. When he's in a suggestible state, she makes Oliver drink chloroform, which ultimately ends his life. Victoria falls under suspicion and is put on trial for the crime, but nobody can explain how she managed to get her husband to ingest the poison. She's found not guilty and left to escape with George as they planned. Mesmerized provides one answer to a mystery that has never been fully solved. The actual mystery took place in London in 1886. The woman Victoria was based upon wasn't a poor orphan, but Adelaide Blanche de la Tremoille, the illegitimate daughter of a wealthy Frenchman. She was married to Thomas Edwin Bartlett, a man 11 years her senior who owned several stores. The two appeared to be happy, if somewhat unusual. Edwin has been described as having mild hypochondria and a worry about being hypnotized, but this didn't seem to be a problem with Adelaide specifically. Doctors noted that she was a loving wife to her husband. There was a third person in their marriage, the Reverend George Dyson. Dyson was supposed to be Adelaide's tutor, but the two were close. Edwin decided that if he were to pass away, Adelaide should marry Dyson. It was an unusual arrangement, but those who knew the three said that it was a perfectly platonic relationship. Edwin had a number of health problems. A botched trip to the dentist had left him in significant pain. He was undergoing treatment to fix the problem, but his gums were still inflamed in December of 1886. Adelaide asked Dyson to get chloroform for her. At the time, the substance was used to treat a number of ailments, but it was also extremely dangerous. Adelaide said that Edwin's doctor didn't know about her medical abilities, so wouldn't get the substances for her. Dyson went to 4 different chemists to get the substance. Adelaide changed her story multiple times about what the chloroform was for. She claimed it was to treat one of Edwin's ailments, then to help him sleep, and then to stop him from making unwanted advances towards her. But whatever her reason for getting the chloroform, she claimed she didn't use it. On the night of December 31st, 1885, all seemed to be well when the Bartletts went to bed. Edwin had returned from a dentist appointment and went to sleep without any problems. In the early hours of the following morning, Adelaide discovered Edwin was no longer alive. An autopsy was ordered. Edwin's father had been suspicious of Adelaide for a while, even accusing her of having a relationship with his younger son. It was an accusation he retracted in front of a lawyer. He believed foul play was involved in Edwin's passing. The autopsy revealed significant quantities of liquid chloroform in Edwin's stomach, but there was no damage to his throat or larynx. Adelaide was put on trial for taking Edwin's life, but the prosecution couldn't explain how she'd managed to get him to ingest the poison without causing any other damage. She was found not guilty, even though the jury believed she was suspicious. After the trial, doctors said Adelaide should tell them how she did it, but the truth was never revealed. Number 2. In 2024, Lionsgate released the movie Boneyard to less than positive reviews. The story was based on a true crime in Albuquerque that still remains unsolved to this day. Boneyard tells the story of law enforcement trying to solve the horrifying crime that became known as the West Mesa murders. Most of the plot revolves around the tension between different officers and the belief that the criminal is actually a member of the police force. By the end of the film, the main suspect is ruled out and the criminal remains at large. While the movie may not have been popular among critics, it did bring attention back to an unsolved crime that's gone cold. In February of 2009, a woman walking her dog in West Mesa, Albuquerque, discovered a bone. After showing her friends a photo, they realized this didn't belong to an animal and contacted the police. The police arrived at the scene, and over the next few weeks, they uncovered the remains of not just one person, but 11. They belonged to young women and girls who'd been buried between 2001 and 2005. It took the police months to identify all the victims, and some required DNA evidence for their identities to be confirmed, and all had been reported missing years earlier. The horrifying discovery brought some closure to families and loved ones who'd been searching for them for years, but also pointed to a horrifying reality that had been hiding just out of sight for years. Law enforcement suspected that the same criminal was responsible for all 11 cases. He was given the nickname the Bone Collector, the same name used in the Boneyard movie. But law enforcement had few clues that could lead them to a suspect. Most of the victims were connected by their work. They all had ties to street work. This meant their initial disappearances didn't receive much attention, and also that the people that they were last seen with may not have been the most likely to come forward to talk to the police. It's believed that this job is what attracted the Bone Collector to them, but what his motivation was has never been determined. It may simply have been that they were the easiest targets to him, but some have suggested that the criminal may have seen the crimes as a just cause. Over the years, many suspects have been tied to the case. Unlike in the Boneyard, none of these have ever been identified as a police officer, but one suspect was similar to a character in the movie. Lorenzo Montoya lived 3 miles from the gravesite and had a history of violence towards women, especially those in the same line of work as the victims. In 2006, he took the life of a woman named Eureka Hill. As he was preparing to dispose of her body, he was confronted by Eureka's boyfriend. The boyfriend took Montoya's life. The police believed Eureka wasn't Montoya's first victim. There was nothing concrete connecting him to the West Mesa cases, but the fact that they appeared to stop after he passed away only made him more suspicious. But the crimes may not have stopped. Before the remains were found, the police had created a list of women who'd gone missing from the area. Many of the missing women were found at West Mesa, but there are many more who still remain missing. It's possible the criminal or criminals found a new grave location which is yet to be found. While the popular belief is that a single criminal was responsible for the crimes, it's also possible that some kind of organization was actually behind the disappearances and attacks. The police have continued to appeal for information in this case. Anybody with information can contact the 118th Street Task Force at 1-877-765-8273. Number 1. In 2003, Bong Joon-ho released his second feature film as a director, Memories of Murder. In interviews after its release, he talked about how he could imagine the person who inspired the movie sitting in the audience, watching it and judging its authenticity. That was because the person responsible for the horrifying crimes depicted in the movie had not yet been caught. It wasn't until decades later that the unsolved crimes portrayed in the film finally got an answer. Memories of Murder is about the then unsolved Hwaseong murders. Between 1986 and 1991, women and girls in the city of Hwaseong, South Korea, lived in fear of a mysterious criminal. Dozens of people were attacked, and 10 people lost their lives. The victims varied in age and appearance. The first victim was an elderly lady who disappeared while walking home from visiting her daughter. The next was a 25-year-old who vanished from a bus stop. Some victims were found just days after they vanished, others months later. But the method of attack was the same in each case, allowing the police to tie most of them together. The investigation into the crimes was one of the biggest in South Korean history. Millions of man-hours were spent investigating the crime, extracting valuable forensic evidence from the crime scene, and interviewing the victims who were able to escape with their lives. Unfortunately, the police couldn't get a detailed description of the attacker. All they had was his rough height, age, and build. DNA technology at the time wasn't good enough to build an accurate profile of the criminal, but they did have a blood type that helped them to rule out some suspects. Thousands of men were interviewed and investigated. Unfortunately, pressure to solve the crimes led to disturbing behavior by police officers. Some suspects were attacked and coerced into making confessions. One of these was a man named Yoon. In 1989, Yoon was just 22 years old when he was arrested for taking the life of the criminal's 8th victim. The police believed this was a copycat crime. Yoon wasn't the main person they were looking for, but he was responsible for this specific attack. Yoon confessed to the crime, but only after being attacked by police during interrogation. He served 20 years in prison for the crime, and it was only after the real criminal was apprehended that he was found innocent. The movie about the crimes focuses on the investigation, with fictional detectives attempting 2 different methods to catch the mysterious figure responsible. It also includes the police violence faced by many of the men who became suspects in the case. But Memories of Murder could not provide an answer to the central mystery. At the end of the movie, just like in real life, the criminal was still at large. It wasn't until advancements in DNA technology that Lee Chun-jae was identified. Lee hadn't been able to watch the movie about his crimes. He was in prison, having taken the life of his sister-in-law in 1993. He was apprehended for that crime and sentenced to life in prison. The statute of limitations for his other crimes had passed by the time Lee was identified. At first, he denied any involvement in the case, but eventually confessed to taking the lives of 14 other people, including the victim in Yoon's case. He told the police he was surprised he hadn't been caught sooner, and he had no real reason for committing his crimes. Lee remains in prison to this day. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future videos. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.